my pleasure to introduce Dr. Tom Goreau. He is president of Global Coral Reef Alliance and chief scientist at Regeneration. He spent over 65 years exploring coral reefs across the Caribbean and globally. He's published more than 150 papers on coral reef and marine restoration, and is the co-inventor of the Hotspot method for predicting coral bleaching from satellite data. Dr. Goreau works with UN agencies, governments, and conservation groups worldwide to regenerate their coastal ecosystems, fisheries, beaches under local management. His work focuses on innovative science to reverse climate change impacts on coral reefs and coastal ecosystems, offering potential solutions for 7 Mile Beach erosion and other local application. Please join me in welcoming him, as he's also going to briefly go through his first presentation, just for anybody who missed that, just to kind of make sure that you get the full, his first but mostly focus on the second side of the presentation on regeneration. So please help me welcome him.
Okay, well, thank you. Is that loud enough for everybody? Yes. Okay, so I'm actually going to show PowerPoints from 2 different presentations that I made in the last week. And really, because it's a different audience, so I'm going to recapitulate those. I'm going to try to move very fast because I'm not going to make the same emphasis. So, so the first talk was a shorter one. It was on potential impacts of the proposed cruise ship terminal here in Georgetown. And the second one, and then there I was talking only about short-term impacts. The second talk was really about long-term impacts and what to do about it. So I'll try to move to that as quickly as I can. We'll move through the first one very quickly. The coral reefs need the cleanest, clearest waters to grow. I mean, that's a fact. They're not resilient ecosystems. There's been a lot of nonsense put out mostly by the US and Australia about how their reefs are resilient. Well, they're not. They're dead, okay, just like everybody else, and that's because they let the water quality deteriorate. And anyway, so this is the first good high-quality underwater photograph. In my family, we've been documenting coral reefs changes since about the 1920s. So, and we have the world's largest collection of old underwater photos. So, and this is actually the first close-up underwater photograph that my grandfather took in the Bahamas. This is ocean clarity, and as you can see, I won't point out Grand Cayman because I don't have a pointer, but you know where you are. And it's some of the cleanest, clearest waters in the Caribbean, and that's why the Cayman reefs were so exceptional, and there was extraordinary growing coral reefs all around these islands. Now, when I learned about the incredible clear waters of Cayman, there were 6,000 people here. Okay? Now you have about 90,000. Okay? And what's amazing is the water is still pretty clear compared to almost any other place in the Caribbean. I've dived in almost every Caribbean island. So, and I can just say I'm just back from snorkeling this morning in front of Eden Rock, and there are corals there in 3 feet of water. Okay? That's absolutely exceptional to see that in front of a town anywhere in the Caribbean. Okay? It's extraordinary. And I mean, if you don't protect your water quality, you will lose it. And of course, that site is right next to the proposed cruise ship pier. I'm not going to talk about that in detail, but the point is that the beach, as we know, is largely gone. The thing that made the reef and protected was a growing, healthy coral reef. Okay, now in 1951, he remembers that Hurricane Charlie took the roof off my house, and I was too young to remember it though, but I remember how the reef was 5 years later. It had grown right back up to the surface. Okay, and that's how the reefs were all around Cayman. They could be knocked flat by a hurricane. 5 or 10 years later, they'd completely recovered. And those corals protected the beach sand from washing away. The beach sand would not have been there if it were not for the reef. And it also produced every grain of sand on those beaches, the remains of organisms that lived in reefs. Not corals, mostly small algae that make sand grains. But anyway, so without a healthy growing reef, you can dump sand all you want, any place you want, and it's going to wash away if there's not a healthy reef growing in front of it that can absorb the wave energy and provide new sediment. Now, wherever there are nutrients going in the water, the reefs are pretty much dead. This is a photograph I took in 2008 in front of the turtle farm here in Grand Cayman. And these are algae that indicate sewage, okay? And it's worse now because then they were only getting the turtle farm effluent and now they're getting the dolphin ones on top of that. So Billy took me out there, I put my hand in the water with a camera, but I wouldn't jump in myself. They didn't have a flamethrower, you know, to, anyhow. So, and below that, and this is 2008, the corals were dying from diseases. It was all localized around where the worst pollution on this island was at the time. And this is the same disease that they're claiming is a new disease that they discovered a year or two ago. Okay? This is not a new disease at all. It's one we've been watching evolving and changing all around the Caribbean for 20 years. And sometimes it goes away, but there's always evolving someplace else and getting more virulent and attacking more species with time. So, but it was here in Grand Cayman 2008. It's not new at all. And I think it spread from this area to the other areas of Cayman, but no one noticed it. Now, some aspects of cruise ship ports. Well, this is Grand Turk, and Grand Turk, as you can see, they dynamited out an area very analogous to what they would do in Georgetown, about the same size or shape. And then all of the prop wash buried the reef down here. I ran the coral health survey for the Department of Environment and Coastal Resources in Turks and Caicos Island. You know, this is the only healthy shallow reef worth snorkeling that I could find in Turks and Caicos. Okay? There was good coral deep down on the walls, but in shallow water, this is the only healthy one. It was being killed because every cruise ship that went in and out of there sent a cloud of sediment as they turned their propellers on and off and, you know, reversed their thrusters and all of that stuff and washed right down the street. So those corals were all dying. And we took them, thousands of corals there, and we transplanted them up to the top where you see Coral Nursery, which was parred from the governor's house in Grand Turk. And I'll show pictures of that a little later. So we transplanted the corals who were dying here to the upcurrent side, and luckily this is a place where the current is almost all the time in that direction. So, I mean, that's an example of what you would see here. You're going to have plumes that are going to wash whichever way the currents and the winds and waves carry them all over West Bay, but, you know, more impact closer on. Lighthouse Point in Eleuthera, this area here was the best reefs left in the Bahamas. It was the #1 conservation priority of the Bahamian government until they sold the land to Disney Cruises. And Disney Cruise put in a 1 kilometer long dock because they didn't want to do what Carnival Cruise Line did in Turks and Caicos, blasting the reefs with sediments. So they went way out into deep water. But that's not actually the problem. It's a major grouper spawning site in the Bahamas. Some of the best reefs left, but over here where they're putting in the golf courses and all the other stuff that is going to dump nutrients in the sea, you know, those corals are doomed, I'm afraid. And it's you know, a tragedy for the Bahamas. It's the best they have left. Cozumel, which is the #1 dive destination in the world. I have the oldest underwater photographs of Cozumel, and the Cozumel divers asked me why their corals were dying. Algae were overgrowing them. And I used the algae to trace the source of the nutrients, which is way down here in the dolphin pens. Now, what Cozumel does with their sewage is they pump it all to the north end of the island, and they dump it offshore where the Gulf Stream begins. So, you know, bye-bye, go to Miami, and straight north, except when there's a norther. When there's a norther, all that stinking sewage comes right back to town offshore. So, you know, you definitely can smell it. So Cozumel has a large number of cruise ship lines. It drops off into deep water very quickly. And I'm going to show you this site here where we are growing thousands of corals. That's not me. This is a Cozumel Coral Restoration Project by Dr. Herman Mendez, who's an absolute hero. He's growing thousands of corals here that have been broken by tourist divers in other places. They rescue them, they grow them there, and they're going to build a new sixth cruise ship here right on top of our project. And their environmental impact assessment said there are no corals there, no problem, okay? They paid a lot of money for that EIA, and as usual, the developer pays for the EIA and the consultant does what he's paid to say. So we've had the Mexican Supreme Court ban that development, but that's sort of a temporary ban, and that has now expired. So we expect the jackhammers to come in there quite soon. We don't know when. Falmouth in Jamaica, well, this here, they put in a cruise ship port. They dredged out a reef. All this, I have hundreds of photographs of that reef back in the 1960s. It was really quite exceptional. And then what they did is they took thousands of corals that they removed from here and they glued them onto concrete someplace else, took photographs of them right after they cemented them on, and declared the world's largest successful coral restoration project. Okay? You go back a year later, you'd be lucky to find any of those alive, and that's typical of dredging relocation programs. Okay, I'm back from the Maldives, the same story there. Okay, they transplant them to places where they all die, but they don't admit that. Discovery Bay, Jamaica. Now, in this case, we cleaned up this bay of pollution. It was dying from sewage and algae, and we had them clean it up by, not by treating it adequately, but by pouring it someplace else instead of the bay. So, but with that, the weedy algae that was killing the reef disappeared in Discovery Bay. And when they put the dolphin pens for the cruise ship passengers, the algae immediately came back. Okay? Immediately came back. And then when COVID hit and the cruise ships stopped coming, the dolphinarium went out of business, and the pollution disappeared. Now, they caused this beach right next door, which is the oldest public beach in Jamaica, to be closed. These women are people who swim there every day, and they couldn't go because they were getting skin infections, nose infections, ear infections, eye infections, all kind of things. Slime all over the beach, stinking slime. And it went away almost immediately when they took the dolphins out of the water, and that's the dolphin pen back up there, sorry. I give some other examples of development. These are not cruise ports, but I mean, these are water quality issues related to bad developments. Baker's Bay, Abaco was absolutely, it was a major fish nursery ground for fish, conch, and lobster in Abaco in the northern Bahamas. And the islanders had been fishermen for 300 years on that island. So that was, and they maintained that undeveloped because it was their nursery ground. But it was sold off to developer. That's how it was before, pristine, and the fishermen lived down here at the other end of the island. They kept that untouched. And of course, they dredged out the mangroves. They put a mega yacht marina in there, golf courses, the whole 9 yards. They devastated the place. Of course, they used silt curtains, and the silt goes under, over, and through them. They just don't work. But you know, and we'd studied that reef before this development went in. There were no diseases. One of the best reefs in the Bahamas at that point. There were no weedy algae, no diseases. As soon as the golf course went in, we began seeing diseases appear. It's the same one I found in Cayman that I showed you before. Another disease, and slimy algae, you know, overgrowing and smothering everything. And the golf courses go right down to the water's edge. And right here, where there'd been clean white rock, was overgrown with slime because it was flowing right into the sea from the golf course. And that's how the bottom looked, you know, it's covered with red and green algae, and it shouldn't be there. The same developers who destroyed Baker's Bay in Abaco are now doing the same to Barbuda. Okay, Barbuda is the only island in the Caribbean that is owned entirely by its own population in common. When Hurricane Irma destroyed 95% of the buildings on Barbuda, they were forcibly evacuated Antigua for 2 years, and while they were in Antigua, the Antigua government sold the land out from under them to developers. And so they're now, the same people who built in Abaco are now building mega yacht marinas, golf courses, and all that. And these are the sand hills that are the source of fresh water for Codrington Lagoon, which in my view is the #1 conservation priority in the Eastern Caribbean, because it is a pristine nursery ground for lobster, conch, and fish for all of the Eastern Caribbean. It's one of the most important migratory bird wading sites in the Caribbean, and it's the largest colony of frigate birds in the entire New World. So we're trying to protect that. The fishermen don't want this development. They had their island stolen from them, but it's underway. Maldives, I'm back there recently. This is a dredging ship. They're filling in this atoll. They're going to make it fill in the whole thing. They're just dumping sand into there. And like this one, this is all landfill, dredged up from below. And half of the population of the country lives in these cities here. And the sewage outfalls all go out here. And when you go over them, what you see, since when you flush your toilet, is fresh water. So when they go in the outfall, it comes right up to the surface, you know, and you see a slick. of grease and little bits of plastic and other materials, okay? And you can follow that slick like a river because depending on which way the wind and the waves and the currents are flowing, that slick sweeps over the whole atoll, okay? But most of all, it hangs around over here. And so needless to say, when they're dredging up the corals here that they're going to fill in, they're transplanting them to coral nurseries where they're all going to die in the most polluted water. Now, the sand they're dredging up is contaminated with sewage, okay, because all the sewage outfalls are in that area. So anyway, now in the Maldives, they're dredging everything they possibly can because the kickbacks to the politicians are so amazing, so amazing. So they're happy to overlook it. Okay, this is Port of Miami, 500,000 corals destroyed. This is the last dredging program that they did about 2 years ago. And of course, you know, the environmental impact assessment said nothing would be harmed, and the reality was very, very different. I've just this morning have gotten an environmental impact assessment of the previous dredging in Miami 10 years before, in which the same thing happened. So it's clear they didn't learn any lessons from it. Okay? Miami, but Miami Beach is the first place. Let me tell the story of that. I knew the first marine biologists at the University of Miami, and they grew up spearfishing on the reef that was in front of Miami Beach. Miami Beach was there only because it had a healthy reef to protect it and produce the sand. And so the business people in Miami Beach decided they needed a beach that was twice as wide because they could make twice as much money. So they widened the beach. The sand that they dumped buried the reef, killed it. It's buried under the sand. And since then, they have to dump sand basically every other year because it keeps getting washed away by every storm that passes by. So it's just an endless cycle that they're in. And Fort Lauderdale, it's almost the same thing. I found the largest staghorn reef left in Florida right in front of downtown Fort Lauderdale, but there's a $60 million contract out there to kill it by dredging. They said there was no reef there, okay? But it was, you know, half kilometers of staghorn in water that was, 10 feet deep, like as deep as this room, right in front of the shore. Anyway, and the reason that reef was there is because it was the only stretch of southeast Florida that they had not already dumped sand on the beach. That's why they still had a reef there, but they were planning to kill it. Okay, Cancun faces right into the waves and wind. It's the opposite of Grand Cayman. And of course, Cancun spends millions of dollars a year dredging sand, putting it on the beach, and washes away by the end of the season. The first hurricane that comes, it's all gone. The sand that they're dredging up is full of rocks and full of broken shells. People cannot walk on it barefoot without tearing their feet apart. It's just a failure. Now, in Cancun, the Mexican Navy did a detailed hydrological study, and they concluded it was utterly pointless to try to dump dredged sand on Cancun Beach until they had a reef in front to protect the beach from washing away. But they did the massive study, and the Cancun Hotel and Beach Commission has ignored it because they're getting kickbacks from the dredging companies who have their dredges parked right around the corner, just waiting because they know there's a non-stop business waiting for them. Galveston is the same story, okay, and among many others. Okay, now I want to just say something about the local situation here with Eden Rock and Soto's Reef. You have live corals here in shallow water in the areas that would be affected by the proposed dredging. So, my advice to you is basically not to kill your corals for short-term profit and save them for future generations because they're the last you have. And you're down to your last 5 or 10% of corals now. The whole branching corals have vanished. It used to be on top. You're seeing the basement story of the big 1,000-year-old corals that have somehow managed to survive up to now. But those are 90% dead. But the water's still clean enough that corals could grow there, but they're not because there isn't recruitment. There are no baby corals coming because high temperature has stopped most corals from reproducing in the Caribbean, even though the water's still quite clean here. Whoops, no, that's not what I want to do. Now I want to go, sorry, so that was on the dredging impact. So the point is, you will have silt and sediment, and that's going to migrate all up and down if that plan goes through. And if you really need to have a cruise ship port, my advice is to have it someplace where you won't damage your most precious resources. So let's now try to go to the other presentation, and I think I have to go to here. No, maybe, I might have to, here, that's it, okay. And now, PowerPoint, okay. Right, so now I want to talk really about long-term changes. And again, I've tried to move quickly. And if you're bored, it's okay, or you have questions, that's fine too. So this is a video taken last week on the 7 Mile beach. And it's got a wave about this high coming in, and what hits the vertical seawall sprays 10 feet up in the air, okay? And that's inevitable, because a vertical wall reflects the wave energy completely. The wave goes off with the same height that it came in with. And what it does is it washes away all the sand in front of the vertical wall and then underneath until it collapses. That's always happened to every seawall that's ever been built. Where you're off over here on the sand, there's a gradual slope, so the wave doesn't all hit at once and it gets separated. And the sand is able to stay there, but it's washed away in front of every vertical seawall. And there's no other kind here in Grand Cayman. That's what's astonishing. I mean, no competent marine engineer would build a vertical seawall, although they're the cheapest. Okay, so, but that's what you have. So, and those seawalls have caused a large part of the erosion here. And what they do, this is Galveston, coming back to Galveston I mentioned earlier. This is a 1954 aerial image. You notice these red spots that are well inland of the beach. Well, Galveston in 1900, a hurricane killed, 5,000-10,000 people. I don't even remember the number. I wasn't around, but more people than ever died in a hurricane in the Caribbean, I believe, in Galveston. And what they did is they built a huge seawall in front of Galveston to protect it from hurricane surges. And what that causes, a current to form along the base of the seawall that washed all the beach sand away. And so every year they have to dump sand in front of the beach at the beginning of the tourist season. By the end of the tourist season, it's gone. Now there's no more sand left to dredge, because every time they go through that cycle, they lose a bit to deep water. The same is true of Miami and Fort Lauderdale. There's no more dredgeable sand left. So here what they did in Galveston is they extended the seawall, and here you can see the end of the seawall right above. As soon as they put the seawall in 74, the whole beach downstream vanished, just washed away. And they made it worse by digging pits to excavate sand to dump in front of the beach. So, that's, it's the same thing you're doing here in Cayman, dynamiting the rock to pile up and make landfill, Anyway. So this is by 2010, and you can see those red marks are now in the sea. And there are billionaires' mansions down here collapsing into the sea, and the state of Texas asked us if we could grow back this beach, using wave power. And we said, yes, of course we could. And then the governor of Texas declared that climate change was a hoax, and sea level rise and global warming were not real, and no Texas state agency could even discuss or mention the issue. So that's right. So those guys, so we can't help them. They don't have a problem. You can only help those who want to help themselves. Okay, so the point is, dredging doesn't work unless there's a reef to protect. And what we do is we go back growing reefs. And this is from Turks and Caicos Island. This is the one we built in front of the governor's house with a cable going way to shore. It's about 20 feet deep, and that's a person there swimming in the water for scale. Okay, these are about 60 feet long. And this is where we transplanted the corals that were being killed by the cruise ship mud from the other side. Put huge numbers of corals on. This picture's before and this one after 2 Category 5 hurricanes 3 days apart. That again demolished 90 or 95% of all the buildings on the island. And there was no damage to our reef. Okay, the governor's house was destroyed. Our power supply was destroyed. The cable was ripped out, but there was no damage to our reef at all. And that's because, and I tell you, this was not welded. We built it by hand, and we hand tied it with little wire because we didn't have a welding machine. And the corals were only very loosely attached. But we lost almost none of them. And most interestingly, the structure got the sand built up under. So the lower level is buried in the sands. Okay? It actually accumulated sand in the hurricane because the waves passed through it, lost a little bit of energy, and dropped sand out. If it had been a solid object, it would have been ripped apart. Now you see there's a reef back here in the background, and almost all the corals were smashed off on that. So a solid object creates reflection and scour. And nearby here, they had reef balls. Well, you know reef balls. Those are the things in front of Marriott. And they had a whole bunch of those here. Well, the ones in Marriott are sitting on top of hard bottom. So when the waves come around them, they scour away all the sand around and under them. But now they're sitting on bedrock with a gap under them. Okay? Here they were sitting on deep sand. And so the scour around them and under them just literally caused them to sink right into the sand. And some of them we could just see the tops, and some disappeared entirely because they caused so much erosion around them. Okay? That's what you have at Marriott. Anyway, we lost our cable. We never had the money to replace it, so that's another dead project. Okay, what we do here, and you saw it in that previous thing, is we use ordinary construction steel. We bend it, twist it, weld it. We can do that in any size or shape. It's the cheapest construction material in the world, reinforcing bar. And every concrete building here has tons of this stuff in it. Okay? It's the cheapest element in the cost of a building. What costs the money is the cement, the aggregate, the plywood forms, and the labor. Okay? So the steel, hardly comes into the cost. I mean, I'm sure it's part of the budget, but it's small. So anyway, so we make structures out of steel. And then what we do is we electrify it. We pass a trickle charge of direct current that you cannot feel through it. First of all, that stops all rusting. In fact, it unrusts the steel. We start with red rusty steel, and the red shrinks and disappears. It turns gray and black as it turns back to steel, to iron. And then it turns white as little limestone crystals begin to grow over it. And they spread until they cover the whole surface. They grow like tree rings or like coral growth, layer by layer. And these ones here are about 2 to 3 years old from the Maldives, all these pieces you see here, parts of structures that we sawed out. And you can see there wasn't rusting. And that one rusted after they took it out of the water, but the one on top. And the one at the upper left is from Louisiana. And that was one of the first biorock projects done in the 70s. And oysters spontaneously settled on it and grew to adult size in 3 months. Well, this was invented by an architect who was trying to produce building materials from the sea. And I heard, and it began in the 70s, I heard, and has many applications. This is, okay. I won't talk too much about that, but he wanted to make buildings on land from it and use the ocean as a mine. And in fact, this material is 2 to 3 times harder than ordinary concrete. And depending on the cost of electricity, it's a lot cheaper to produce. As we can produce harder and better material than concrete, every ton of concrete produces a ton of CO2. This is CO2 neutral or CO2 negative. And we can produce harder material in any size or shape we want. It just takes time. Okay, and that's 1 to 2 centimeters a year. A wall that thick is going to take you a decade. So that's why it didn't take off. But I asked him to come to Jamaica to work with me on growing corals with it. And we did it for 20 years or so until he died. And I'll show you some examples of what we do. This is our first project in Jamaica. These corals were dying from pollution when I rescued the little broken fragments. And they grew 3 times in size in about 3 months in an environment where they were dying from pollution. This is also from Jamaica. This is a staghorn coral. Again, the corals were dying from pollution. I found a small fragment. It was growing nearly a centimeter a week. Okay, record rates in places with extremely bad water quality, not like what you have here in Cayman. This is a video from St. Bart's, and I'm just going to show you. This is one of our projects. This was taken in 2023. As you can see, it's water that's 3 feet deep, okay? And it's right on top of the reef crest where the waves break. And they're breaking there all the time because this is exposed to the open Atlantic. It's not inside the Caribbean, you understand? It's North Atlantic waters out there. And if you look to either side, you'll see it's barren. It's basically dead reef. It's the old reef crest. This used to be the Acropora zone. in the old days, and that's right in front of the major tourist beach on St. Barth, St. Jean, and this was the dead reef that built that beach. Now that beach is washing away, of course, as you'd expect. Now, here's what's interesting. This video here, the guy who takes is being tossed around by the wave surge. It's really rough, you know. But the point is that this structure, I didn't attach to the sea floor. I just sat it down on its own weight. It cemented itself to the sea floor. When Hurricane Irma hit, there were about 30-foot waves breaking on the spot because every house and every hotel, including the Eden Rock Hotel, in that bay was demolished. Okay, but there was actually no physical damage to either our corals or the structure. It's absolutely incredible. Or to the cable that connected it to the land. It had no electricity there for months and months, and when power was restored, they turned the switch and the stuff started bubbling away right away. Of course, it was off power for a long time, but in fact, it survived a Category 5 hurricane of the worst kind, and that was a little astonishing. Another feature of what we do is that our reefs not only are growing, but they're self-repairing. Here is a reef in Bali that was hit by a boat that broke loose from a mooring, smashed into it, broke off the white limestone, and you can see the bare metal there that's been in the ocean for 11 years. It's got no rust on it. And it grows back. The damaged areas grow back first. So it's the only marine construction material that's growing and self-repairing. Everything else deteriorates from day one. So this is what kind of stuff we do. This is a 4-year-old biorock reef in Bali. And we built it on an area that was barren sand. There was little bits of dead coral, fragments sitting there, but there were no fish and no corals there. And it's in front of a dead reef. Now, this is about 20 feet or so depth. And then the reef slopes up to the shore. And there was an incredible coral reef there that I filmed dying from high temperatures in 1998. And almost nothing survived the high temperatures there. So we were building down on the sand in front of a reef that was totally dead. We didn't want to further damage it. And then at this location, we have about 150 reefs like that. This is about as tall as this room. About 150 reefs, of each one of a different size and shape. Now, what that has done is several things. First of all, we're producing so much sand from the calcareous algae, the sand-producing algae. I don't have pictures of the land side, but the beach along in front of this project was washing away. They were building seawalls, the trees were collapsing into the sea, and it was a black sand beach, volcanic sand. Now, what happened after we put these projects in 10 years later, we noticed, the erosion had not only stopped, the beach was growing. And it was growing with white sand being added, so to change color because we're producing so much limestone mixing with the black volcanic sand. And it was entirely unintentional, but we grew back that beach. And this is before and after when we were laying the cables. There was all little things that later would grow back, but all these other things settled by themselves in that area. We attracted the larvae in tremendous amounts. They attracted the electrical field. And we would do the same thing here, except there's not much larvae left to attract in the Caribbean. So it's a big challenge. But that's what we did in Indonesia. This is in the Maldives, and it's a typical Maldives tourist beach. Some have rock walls, some have sandbags, some have, more exotic things. We built a biorock reef in front of that severely eroded beach, transplanted corals on top of it. There was no sand beneath when we began. It was just bare limestone hard ground. That's after about 10 years or so. That's after about 15 years. So we just grew a whole reef there. Now, the beach that had washed away grew back by itself. Okay, they sent us a photo 2 years later. The beaches, a natural beach has grown back. In fact, that's the beach that we grew back. When we began that building, had a mountain of sandbags in front, and the owner of the hotel said he wouldn't be able to save it. They'd have to tear the building down. So we saved their beach. And then we saved their reef here. Here's our reef there that grew the beach. And the first picture with the sandbags was over there, and the second one there. This whole natural reef here, I found one live coral after the 1998 bleaching event. I was filming I swam all around that island filming before and after. And it was essentially almost nothing left, except on our electric reef where almost all the corals survived. Okay, the electricity made them stronger, faster growing, and healthier, so they resisted the damage. Now, unfortunately, the Maldivian owner then sold this resort to a foreign investor who immediately cut the power off. So we're using as much power as the beach lights or as much as the 3 air conditioners worth of electricity on an island with hundreds of air conditioners. But anyway, they cut our project, and the reef was magnificent. They had the only natural beach in the Maldives, the coral reef full of live corals and live fish in front of them for 18 years, and then another bleaching event hit, and then all the corals we saved died. Because they had shut the power off, and it's the power that makes a difference, the electrical trickle charge. So that was a tragedy, but it's taken us 25 years to be able to do more projects in the Maldives. That's that beach we grew back, and the Asian tsunami neither affected the beach nor our reef, although my Maldivian colleague was washed off the island by the tsunami. Okay, another example in Indonesia. This is a fishing village. They used to have a wide beach. That's where all the boats used to go. It's sea level rise and it's washing away. So the government came in and built a concrete wall. The main one is up above. It immediately collapsed, like almost all these concrete walls do. And so they built an extension, but this time they had to build another wall of rocks in front of it to keep this one from falling down. And the rocks cost as much as the concrete. It's an extremely expensive proposition. There's the old seawall and the village church. And then down current from that seawall, there was a luxury dive resort. These are some of the finest reefs in the world, anywhere in the world that have dived. Absolutely exceptional. And they kept having, as the beach kept washing away because of the current caused by the seawall up nearby, up in the village next door, all their cabanas, for guests to watch sunset, margaritas and stuff. They kept having to move them inland because they kept falling it down this cliff. And this cliff was about this high, okay? And this is December 2015, and trees had fallen into the sea and so forth. So in December 2015, we built a whole bunch of biorock reefs, and those are those little dots you see there. This is a low tide image, and you could see the tops at low tide, which I normally wouldn't do, but they wanted a beach back as quick as they could, so they didn't object to having it being visible at low tide, which I didn't expect. But yeah. So, and this is 8 months after we installed those projects. That's that same cabana, and that's that same tree. After 8 months, that grew back by itself. I mean, no pumping, no dumping, no dredging. It grew back by itself. Okay, because what happened is that the wave energy that eroded that beach was coming over the reef crest from this side, and we just dissipated that wave energy so the waves deposited sand instead of eroding them. That's all. That's what a natural reef does. So this is our new beach. This is the edge of the old cliff, and you can just basically see spots here that are our little reefs. Now, this is at low tide. They had invested in gabion baskets, rock baskets. They were commonly used. It's illegal to use them in the United States in the ocean because everyone knows they will rust and collapse in a year. But they're widely used all over the world, and they rust and collapse in a year. Okay, every place I see them, but people are using them. But what we did is we said, well, we don't like this stuff. We would never use it ourselves, but since you've already thrown your money away on it, we'll incorporate it into our design, but we'll prevent it from rusting because we'll wire it to electricity, so it will never rust. It'll be a permanent protection. And that's what we did. We didn't transplant any corals, but there were little fragments sitting around in the seagrass. The seagrass just grew like mad, and the corals just sprang up all around the base. This is after about 2 years. And these are just fragments of corals that were lying around. So there are just many of them. And they're even settling new corals. This is the gabion baskets, which by this point would have rusted and collapsed. And we have corals and sea urchins, lobsters, shrimp, crabs, everything. Now, this is that same beach that we grew back. And this is after basically a Hurricane Force storm hit it. And there was no erosion to the beach, even though that wave went right over and flooded all the houses inside. The beach didn't wash away. Now, I mean, I've been walking here on the South Sound, and I can tell you that those waves that we had coming from the southwest last week washed away about this much sand and soil all along the shore there. Okay? I mean, not even a hurricane or a norther, Sorry. So our beach, I mean, even under the worst conditions, seemed to perform pretty well. Their seawall didn't, though. So that's their seawall. That caused erosion. I mean, the waves break, they wash away under, around, and over, and they have to be rebuilt over and over again. So that's what we do, is we grow reefs to grow back habitat. What we do works with all marine organisms in any kind of salty water. It's not just coral reefs, sorry.
What does it cost to build the artificial reef?
Questions later. Questions later. Let me finish. I'm about to finish. So this is an example of what could be done here. I mean, what we do, I call these BioRock anti-wave devices because they're curved so there are no vertical faces for waves to reflect off. So the wave comes, rolls up, over, and down. I mean, this is in Indonesia. What we did is we used 3 layers of them. Obviously, 2 is better than 1, 3 is better than 2, but not that much better. So there's probably a trade-off in the number of layers. But we'd do something like this, the spacing, and the idea is that the waves coming from offshore would dissipate energy here. You could grow corals, you could make fish habitat. When I make lobster habitat in Jamaica, Mexico, Panama, Bahamas, I will get dozens to hundreds of lobsters of space this big. You just have to know the right habitat. We could do the same with octopus and most kinds of reef fish as well. It's a matter of knowing what kind of shape they want for habitat. And I think, let me just show you a very short video. This is less than 2 minutes. And you can get the idea here. This is from the Bahamas. It's going to come on 1 second.
Seagrass beds are crucial habitats as fish nurseries, but there's no place for fish to hide. There are no structures for them, and so they get eaten by predators. This BioRock reef in a shallow seagrass in the Bahamas has attracted huge populations of fish that hide in here in the daytime and feed at night, and vice versa. It's made from a single sheet of fencing material that's been rolled up into a double spiral. It's been charged with 6 volts and about 1 amp, about 6 watts. And there are a few tiny fragments of corals. Corals couldn't grow in this habitat because it's too shallow and hot for them. And so there are very few naturally broken fragments of live coral that are washed in from storms, and they transplanted a few of them, and as you can see, they've grown quite magnificently. In addition, the seagrass inside this and around the structure is quite green and growing more tall. Seagrass beds worldwide are being wiped out, and it's a huge ecological catastrophe. With BioRock, we believe we can help restore seagrasses and restore fisheries habitat of the species that rely on these habitats. We've done work with seagrasses in the Mediterranean, and we've found that we're able to grow seagrasses on bare rock where they normally couldn't grow, with prolific root growth and attraction of fish and mussels and clams and a whole very complex ecosystem that built up around them. So we believe that BioRock is going to be a crucial method for restoring seagrass habitat and coastal fisheries in the future.
Some stuff on long-term climate change. I'm going to end very quickly. This is data just published a couple days ago, and it's from the Belize Blue Hole. And the Belize Blue Hole, every time there's a hurricane that hits Belize, it dumps a bunch of sediment into the blue hole, goes straight down this tube, and there's no oxygen at the bottom. So it accumulates layer by layer. And so these people drilled a core at the bottom, and they measured the thickness layer by layer to see how common hurricanes were. And for the last 6,000 years, there seems to have been an increase in it, and then in the last 100 years, shooting up. And they suggest that's likely due to global warming, which seems reasonable. So we have to worry about increasing hurricanes due to global warming. 2023 was the hottest year in history. And I developed the method for predicting coral bleaching from satellite data, so I've been tracking all the satellite data worldwide since they went up. And this is just the Caribbean in 2023, but I do the same thing from all over the world. Now, what this shows is the cumulative heat exposure over the year in terms of the excess temperature above the coral bleaching threshold times the number of weeks that it was above that. And the areas that were black were above the bleaching threshold for about 5 months. Okay, we'd never seen that before. Okay, it was the worst year in the Caribbean bleaching. It killed almost all the branching corals everywhere in the Caribbean. And in fact, the worst area was centered around Jamaica, Cayman, and so forth. One little area in Cuba got away. See that yellow spot there in the Bay of Matanzas? That got away. It's the only place in the Caribbean that did not have deadly bleaching, and it's still beautiful. I've been there to see it myself, and I'm working with the Cubans to try to preserve that. And it's a freak accident because when the Gulf Stream goes north from Cozumel, shoots into the Gulf of Mexico, it turns around, cools down a little bit, and comes and hits Cuba from the north and then bounces off Cuba and shoots north again to become the Gulf Stream. And that causes a local cooling effect right in that part of Cuba. It's unique. It's the only part in the Caribbean that has that. And 2024 was even hotter. But again, it was hotter in the east than in the west. We got off more lightly, in Cayman. And Cuba, that part of Cuba got away too. So that's why it's the only place that escaped bleaching in both years. And we're trying to save it, but it's very hard to get money to work in Cuba. Essentially impossible. Okay, last year was not only the record hottest year, it was also the record highest sea level and the greatest rate of sea level increase. And this is based on NOAA satellite data that maps the whole world every day. This is a truly global database. It's not, and it's accelerating. There's no question. And it has barely begun. That's the point. This is where the sea level was the last time it was 2 degrees C warmer than today. And that notch is a sea level notch. This is in the north coast of Jamaica. And you can see the ocean here in Discovery Bay. It's about more than 20 feet lower than that, okay? And that's the last time it was 1 or 2 degrees warmer, okay? It takes a few thousand years for the ice to melt, but that's where we're headed for today's level of CO2. In fact, we're headed for more. And, if you take that sea level there's very little of Cayman that would be above water, okay? Just these little dark brown spots. And in fact, the fact is, and this is the reality, this is global sea level. We said the ice age is 145 meters lower, but in fact, we have another 60 meters to go, okay? We are in a situation with runaway global warming and ice melting. I work very closely with people working on the Arctic ice. It's vanishing. And we're about to get a serious acceleration in both sea level rise and temperature because of that. So the issue that faces all of us in the islands is, are we going to sink or swim, or can we outgrow climate change? And here's the first seawall that was ever built 7,000 years ago in Israel. And these people rolled these rocks from miles inland to protect a village from the ocean. And sea level overtopped it about 6,000 years ago. And this is buried under a sandbank. And every now and then they get a terrific storm that washes away the sand and exposes this ancient seawall. And then it gets buried again. So anyway, every seawall that's ever been built will be overtopped by global sea level rise, except the biorock ones, because we're growing to match sea level rise, so we can keep up with it. And that's quite unique. So my own view is that if we are seriously concerned about the future, we'll start regenerating our coastal ecosystems and growing them faster than we can destroy our own life support system. It's not what we're doing right now, but the technology is there to do it. It can be done on any size or scale if there was the will and the interest and the funding. I mean, none of those exist now. I mean, there's not a single country in the world that's seriously protecting themselves. I'm dealing with proposals I've lived in all the atoll countries. I'm dealing with developing proposals for Tuvalu, Kiribati, the Maldives, Federated States of Micronesia, the Marshall Islands, Tonga, Samoa, Seychelles, and Belize, among others. So they all have the same problems, but in fact, what we're hearing from the international agencies is, well, we don't have enough money to help you people, you better just gather on the high points so you can be evacuated. Okay, so what they're planning is symbolic shore protection projects. Okay, I've been asked by the Asian Development Bank to build reefs to protect floating solar panels, but not the people would be the solar panels. So you understand, there's a serious disconnect because no country and no funding agency in the world is dealing with this issue. They're all pretending it's not happening. And, we can't keep getting away with that. And I hope Cayman, among other places, develops policies to protect yourselves. I'll stop there. But anyway, I mean, the thing is that we're ready to work with anyone who's serious about protecting their coastlines and trying to grow back beaches and by growing reefs in front wherever we can. Each place is a different setting. There's a different range of wave forces, sediment types. Are we on hard bottom? Are we on soft sand? Do we have to anchor it because you might be hit with a hurricane soon? All of these are factors. Height, width, distance from shore, all of that affects the cost, obviously. So I can't give you a cost. But what I can say is that if you imagine building an ordinary seawall, okay, you build the seawall out of rebar, okay, and that costs a certain amount, and that's all you do. You can charge it and let it grow by itself. The cost of that is a tiny fraction of what a reinforced concrete seawall, the same dimensions, would cost. I mean, a tiny fraction. We won't know until we do big projects, because basically we do small demonstration projects due to the lack of funding. But so we can't really say what a large one would cost, but for sure it would be cheaper than any of the alternatives in terms of the cost. In terms of the benefits, it would be infinitely better, because no concrete seawall is going to give you the biological benefits of improved coral growth, increased resistance to stress, increased fisheries habitat, or any of those other things. So we think it's a wise investment, put it that way. So that's the answer to your question. Okay. Yeah. Yes, sorry.
Sorry. Hi. That's really interesting, your closing quote, because Sustainable Cayman actually did a discussion brief on departing shores, rising tides departing shores. We did a discussion brief on that Cayman really needs to be looking at building restorative, resilient communities. So that's on our website. But that ties into, so something I want to talk about and ask related to this. I grew up here, I'm from here, and I have seen the development along 7 Mile Beach and also where I live in South Sound. And historically, we've always put our roads along the coastal ridges where the sand has accumulated to the highest point. And along those beach vegetation areas, the beaches they had trees, they have shrubs, they had things knitted together, in my view, holding the beaches together, and that's how they then, and over years, and hundreds of years, the deposits, and that's how you got your beach ridges. So I understand what you mean about the seawalls. I understand what you mean about this. My concern is the way that we're developing here, in that if we, however we restore the beach that we've lost, a lot of those pictures you had up there actually showed infrastructure on the land side that was not highly developed, as in they were low structures or primitive structures. They weren't 20-story hotel structures. Mm-hmm. What we're doing along 7 Mile Beach...
Well, I would say the places we work in Indonesia are towns that make their living entirely from our projects. They're towns of thousands of people, so they are fully populated along those coasts. They're not high-rise concrete buildings, but
so that's my thing. So,
yep.
So we're building high-rise buildings along, and historically our properties along 7 Mile Beach have been low-level, probably what you call these floating concrete platforms, right? They haven't drilled down. What they're doing now, in order to put up these high-story buildings, is they're actually dredging down, and they're digging out sand, and they're building understory basements, parking, and things like that. So they're actually, in my view, they're actually building a wall all the way along the beach, because there's no setbacks, there's no distances between, and we're going to have this wall of buildings.
Well, listen, the seawalls are a whole different issue, but I'm saying, all I can say is you already have them, you're stuck with them, and I think that we can reduce the impacts they're having causing erosion by growing reefs in front of them of a suitable size and shape. Now, what we try to do is we don't do what groins do. We're not trying to interrupt the longshore drift of sand, because that just piles up sand and steals it from your neighbor downstream, and that's the standard solution that people do. We're not interfering with longshore drift. We're simply slowing down the offshore waves coming in so they reach the shore with less velocity. Now, that should slow down the longshore drift too, because that's sort of wave driven. So I don't really know, it'll make it somewhat calmer and back.
Yeah, so that's what I'm thinking. If the buildings, so say the seawalls remove and you're trying to build back your sand on the beach with your coral reef that you've grown. If you're hitting a block, are you saying that your reef is going to keep the sand there?
If we do what?
So,
I mean, I'm not going to try to block it. I mean, my idea is to build a reef in front. Now,
correct.
The higher it is and the
will
closer
bring
to shore.
And build up your 7 Mile Beach back. So
yes, that would be the idea at the shoreline.
If you say you don't remove your seawall. Let's just take a simple look. So say you don't remove your seawall and your sand comes back. Doesn't it just wash, the same wave action that's happening, isn't that going to just continue?
Well, not if it's running up a slope like this as opposed to a vertical slope. I mean, what we're trying to do is avoid reflection. That's what we're really trying to do. I mean, it works on very different physical principles. So,
Yeah.
I mean, a hurricane waves will go through it, you know, for sure. I mean, that's really why it survives a hurricane. If it was rigid, it would be all those things would have been torn right out. So I think there are a lot of possibilities that could be done here. Let me put it that way. I mean, there are. I mean, in many cases, you know, there isn't the money for it. We're talking about protecting whole countries, whole islands. You know, not just little patches of reef. So. Anyway, when people get serious about dealing with global climate change, they're going to have to do this, or they're going to have to run. It's one or the other. So.
Have you created a proposal?
Sorry, how about what?
Have you created a proposal yet for the Cayman Islands?
No.
Like, or a plan?
No, I just got here a couple days ago.
Private investment?
No, I just got here a couple days ago, and I mean, I'm trying to let people know that they have alternatives because, you know, the people who dredge sand and build seawalls won't tell you about this stuff. Well,
The CCMI last year, I think, released their report on coral bleaching. And they had done a nursery in Little Cayman. And we're trying to grow corals and things. Anyway, the bleaching event pretty much devastated all their corals. And
everywhere in the Caribbean,
they're
except Cuba.
And they've been studying, obviously, and they're just, we're going backwards.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that, I guess that would be my
Well,
only
those
question
methods, let
about
me explain.
this.
Those methods all fail because of poor water quality. They can grow the corals all they want, put them out, and they're going to die. So they're just coral killing operations because those corals are not growing faster, not more resistant to stress like the ones we're growing are.
Yeah, no, in Little Cayman they don't have in Little Cayman they don't have that issue.
They don't have what?
Hot water melt.
I know they have the hot water, that's what I'm trying to understand, how this is going. So in Little Cayman.
The electrical charge.
Oh, okay. Now that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, the electrical charge,
Yes.
from what I gather, is what strengthens and fortifies and
To
gives
make them
more
survive coral
resistant.
bleaching.
Yeah.
It
Okay.
makes them survive the coral bleaching in the shallower water.
It's the only method we know that does. That's the
Right.
thing. Yeah.
So the electrification of these reefs by this very, very low voltage is what keeps them flourishing, keeps the sand being accreted underneath them and producing more sand to build up the beach.
Yeah.
Well, you know, there are alternatives. Now, I mean, I know that you invited a lot of political types to this meeting, and none of them came.
I love this.
All right. So it's up to you to spread the message to them, okay?
Yes, yeah.
So I hope you have a recording and you can pass it on to them. Sorry?
I have a question.
I'm sorry?
I just have a question.
Yes.
So if the low voltage is removed, then those structures, will they start to rust? Even with the corals there?
Well, you mean if you turn the power off?
If the
Well,
power
as long
turns
as the
off.
power is on, they will never rust. What we would probably do in many cases is just turn it down to a very low level just so it can't rust and preserve its, you know, ability to repair itself. If we had to repair itself, if there was a hurricane, we'd want to turn it up a little bit and make it grow a little faster. So that's something we could do.
Okay, so it always has to be connected to electricity. No?
Yes. Now, I didn't show it, but I mean, for example, I did a project in Tobago where I was growing corals in nasty water, okay? So the corals were actually losing weight due to the really disgusting water quality conditions. The ones that I electrified increased in weight, I think it's like 8-fold in 16 weeks, while the controls were losing weight. And then somebody broke my cable, and our corals, the electrified ones, started to decrease in weight. We fixed the broken cable, and it took off again. So it's the electricity itself. There's no residual effect. I mean, when you turn the power off, they're as vulnerable as all the other corals around them. It's the electricity itself that they're making energy from it directly.
But with the if the structure itself rusts because it's turned
Well, the
off for long,
structure could only
would
rust.
Those corals
Yeah.
die then?
Well, they might if the water quality deteriorates, and the water quality is deteriorating every
deteriorate.
place we go, if nothing else from global warming. So yes, that's a serious issue. I mean, the thing is that look, it's not my fault that we have to put them on life support systems. It's the people putting CO2 into the atmosphere who've created this situation. But in fact, to save corals, we'll have them on life support. Until that excess CO2 goes away, that's the world we're going to be living in. You know, seriously, people don't realize what we've done. So, you know, I wish we could save all the corals we can, but in fact, it's going to get much, much worse. So, at any rate, the thing is, even if we can't keep the corals alive, we can still be growing wave protection barriers in front of our beaches. Yeah. Oh.
What are your thoughts on the potential that coral reefs adapt to grow deeper down?
The corals will adapt?
Yeah, that they're going to adapt to grow.
No, there's no sign of that. What we're seeing is sort of extinctive evolution. That is, there's extremely strong pressure. All the ones that are vulnerable to high temperatures simply dying. There's a lot of range of genetic variability within and between species. But I mean, here, no one here has seen a staghorn or elkhorn for a couple of years. Okay? I mean, Jamaica, we're finding one little fragment every kilometer, and these are people swimming the whole, you know, all around the island. And Cuba has just one area that they're left. So it's not going to be easy to find stuff to transplant. So now the ones that remain here are the ones that have survived up to now. And some of these ones out here in front of Eden Rock are 1,000-year-old corals. Okay? Others are much younger. But those are survivors. They've survived temperatures up to now, but they have their limits. And they're going to be, that's going to be reached sooner or later. Okay, and the more we can grow, the better. But whether a coral, you know, exists that can survive this is somewhat questionable. I mean, what we're doing is in the field, we're looking for survivors and trying to propagate. We've been doing that since the first bleaching event in 1987. We've been doing that. In the Maldives, I work with a village that has a huge area of corals that's spreading like mad over the dead reef. Okay? And we're trying to propagate that one. We don't know what's so special about it, but you know, I'm trying to get the Maldivians funding so they can map those corals and propagate them as quickly as they can, because it's so extraordinary to see. But basically around the world, I mean, every time it gets a little bit hotter, we lose more and more of the corals that are most vulnerable. So I don't think we're seeing any evolutionary adaptation. That's just much too slow. Okay, the rate of temperature change that we're putting corals under is greater than they've ever been in their evolutionary history, except for the asteroid impact 65 million years ago. Yeah.
Are there,
So I have to come.
with staghorn and other branching corals, are there any, like, do you ever bring in fragments from other islands or other places?
Well,
if there's none available locally?
well, okay, the question is if you can bring in fragments from other islands. You know, I tell my friends in Grenada begging me to give them some corals from St. Bart's, you know. And, but, you know, there are legal issues about transplanting corals, and most places don't allow that. So I never propose that. Okay, but there are a lot of people now saying the situation is so desperate they have to go grab corals from any place they're alive and transplant them. Now, a lot of places won't allow it. I mean, for example, in Hawaii, I had a colleague who was working in the University of Hawaii Marine Lab in Waikiki Beach, and he was growing all these different genetic varieties to see which ones were more and less sensitive. He was growing them in tanks in the lab. His funding ran out, and he wanted to put the corals back in the ocean. Okay? Hawaii told him, no, those corals came from the other side of the island. You have to destroy them. They're alien corals. And he had to kill all his corals. They wouldn't let him put them in the water from the other side of the same island. So, you know, what response you'll get here, it's up to DOE. But most places would object to that. I mean, there are people proposing it. Corals are naturally migrating away from the poles. You know, they're migrating north and south. But they're migrating to areas where there are no reefs, where it takes thousands of years to grow reefs, and where the water is so polluted with nutrient mud, they're not going to be able to grow anyway, even if it's warm enough. So,
But is it beyond the realm of, like, possibility that is an option, or is it that it's a scientific thing that you
is it beyond the realm of possibility of what?
to transplant corals from another place?
No, it's a legal permit issue.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I
There's no
think,
science really.
I mean, the thing is, people are being forced to leap to extraordinary measures by the situation, okay? And for instance, I deal with a whole bunch of geophysicists who want to make the Earth more reflective to cool it. A lot of people are freaked out about that sort of thing, okay? And a lot of people won't allow that even to be discussed. But as things get more and more out of control, we are going to have to take extraordinary measures, or we're going to have to run. That's my view. Now, corals are pretty much going to go extinct for the next few million years. We'll save all we can as long as we can, but, you know, my granddaughter isn't going to see them. Yes, sorry.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
Finance seems to be the principal reason
Yes.
we haven't been able to progress more commercial scale projects.
Mm-hmm.
What other reasons are governments or the private sector developers give
Well,
you?
the private sector basically seems to believe it's a public responsibility. You know, they own the land, but they don't own the sea. It's the king's bottom out there, right? And so, you know, it's a king's problem. So people will spend millions, you know, planting royal palms on their property, but they won't restore the reef that they killed in front of their beach, you know? So I don't know what to do. I mean, really, if all hotels were required to regenerate the reef in front of their own hotel, it would be a different world. But that's not required. There's no country in the world that requires that. Now, if you can get the Cayman government to require that, okay, you'll be way ahead of everybody else. But there's no
I would be
policy.
say it's not quite as simple as that in the Cayman Islands, with our government and with a regulator and developers. I think it's quite an integrated approach, which I agree is.
Well, an integrated approach is
needed.
needed.
My question is there any more, finance aside, is there any more practical reasons that you've heard of?
Well,
why people wouldn't want, like
not that I know. I don't know.
cultural fishing,
Yes.
commercial boating activities.
Yeah.
Is there
Well,
other things that-
yes, I'm dealing with people at the Asian Development Bank who basically feel no one's going to give these islands money to save themselves, okay, because there's no investment money to be made from these desperately poor people. But however, they can maybe peddle it to investors who then own the reef and collect the fish or something. Now, I don't think investors are going to go into any of these places. I think they're fooling themselves. But what people were trying to peddle was the idea of carbon credits. Now, we greatly increase the biomass. I mean, seagrass, mangroves, we can grow all that much faster. And that stores carbon in the biomass and in the sediments, much more than is in the biomass. So, in fact, blue carbon has been the rage of the last few years. All these countries are expecting, oh, we're going to have a blue economy. People are going to pay us to have a marine economy. Well, no, they're not. They're not. They're fooling themselves. And the thing is, the whole carbon finance thing has collapsed. The people peddling it are scam artists of the worst sort. And basically, they're peddling fake credits because there is no international mechanism for trading carbon. And there will never be as long as we have the present leaders of the United States, Russia, and Saudi Arabia in power. There will never be carbon trading. So that's the hope. And I mean, the Bahamas are sitting there saying, oh boy, our seagrass is worth so many billions, just sitting there waiting for it to land, you know? It's not going to happen. So I think we have to restore our ecosystems anyway if we want to survive, but I don't know how much money we could maybe make, say, selling fish or other things. Now, the Asian Development Bank, I'm dealing with a guy who's really into that and calculating how much money you could make from selling lobsters or fish and all that, but that's all counting your chickens before they're hatched from my point of view. What I want to do is grow and restore ecosystems and see how well you can manage it to produce stuff that's useful. But I couldn't really guess at how valuable it would be, and I think it would be a risk to make that the necessary...
But Cayman's more acute than that.
Sorry?
Cayman is more acute than that. If
Yeah.
we talk about 7 Mile Beach,
Yeah.
it's not a multi-million. Has and historically and the future billion-dollar industry.
Yes, no, I understand.
So the protection and
Okay.
management of that.
But there's
from a
never-
direct income perspective. Forget carbon credits.
Okay,
I
but
agree with
there's
all
never
that.
been an integrated plan. I mean, we can't find out how much beach sand has been lost. You know?
Well, I think it can and has been modelled to a degree.
It may have been modeled, but actually the measurements are what we really need, not the models. I just was looking, the models are almost worthless, quite frankly. They can be manipulated to give almost any answer you want.
Pictorial evidence? There's a lot of pictorial evidence.
Well, the pictorial evidence, for me, that's evidence. That's not models. Yes.
No, but that's what I'm saying. We have that as well.
Yes. Yeah, no, sure. Well, the beach has vanished. Everyone knows that. But I mean, we don't know of actual measurements being made of, the beach profile and where that sand has gone. I suspect that vanished sand went off into deep water for the most part. Some of it got shifted. Billy knows. Billy knows where those sandbars are.
Here in the Cayman Islands, when you walk along the beach and you see that green stringy algae, why is it there? It's because of shit, not properly processed in any sewage system. In 1977, in the Legislative Assembly minutes, Richards and Dumbleton had done a study. The first study done on sewage treatment came on was 1954. In 1977, the minutes of the Legislative Assembly say, and it's introduced by Captain Charles Kirkconnell and Mr. Bassel, the Richards and Dumbleton report, commissioned by the United Kingdom, said that in the 3 Cayman Islands, the groundwater was polluted and contaminated. And it was urgent that a central sewage system be installed in the Cayman Islands. It was started. Mr. Haig Borden was a politician elected in '76, and it was passed over to him. They installed an inadequate sewage treatment facility for 4 miles along the West Bay Road. The standards that were adopted was 30 parts per million suspended solids and 30 parts per million what they call biological oxygen demand. In other words, how much processing you're going to do within the thing. The rest of the world on sewage discharges today is either 0 or 5. We're 6 times more. In the standards are set by the Department of Environmental Health. The Water Authority is charged with the responsibility to regulate the effluents going into the sea. The direct discharges is supposed to be licensed and monitored. Not one discharge of the sewage treatment facilities that buildings have in this island or the Water Authority meets the standards. The government has made a move to say that wonderful off-reg now needs to regulate the Water Authority. Off-reg has no funding to regulate the Water Authority. They have no staff. They have no guidelines. The reports that were written, and there's other reports that were written on this subject, as what sewage is doing to the Cayman Islands. The Water Authority don't have them in their files, those reports. Those reports are now held by the National Archives. But those reports are very fragile, and you can't just go in and read them. And if you want get a copy, they said that they can do electronic scanning of them, but you got to pay money for it. For a report we already paid for when it was done. They don't want to release the reports. Our government is aware of this ongoing problem. We have killed the coral from which we get sand. Grows 5 inches a year in healthy environments. Massive beds of it that we had. They have killed it. If you don't have coral, you don't have sand. If you don't have sand, you don't have a beach. If you don't have a beach, you don't have tourism. And if you don't have tourism, the economy gone to hell. How many people in this country are willing to look at tacking on to construction infrastructure costs. We subsidize 10, 15, and $20 million apartments. They don't pay even the duty. That's how corrupt this country is to the core. Our country is a corrupt, stinkingly corrupt with sewage and with people and the methods that we operate in this country.
Well, you know, I tell Billy, every place I go, they're hiding from the sewage and lying about treating it properly. So but that along with the erosion and climate change and all these other issues are, you know, working together and all have to be dealt with. DOE, well, you know.
Last week
yeah.
in Tampa, Florida, and anybody can subscribe to a magazine called Wastewater Digest. I do, that's where I get a lot of my information from. They had the recycling of water conference, where some jurisdictions now take sewage water and convert it back into drinking water.
Yes, so all that can be done. It costs, but it can be done, of course.
Yes,
just like
but
desalinated
again,
water supplies.
We
so.
have flounder economics. All they do is look at the income.
Yeah.
They don't look at what having the cost of that income.
Yes.
The income is a cost. And
Well,
if you want to get the income, you have to cover the cost coming from that.
Yes, I would say that
Simple.
if we try to restore reefs to save the beaches, we're going to have to clean the water up if we want them to live. So it's all part of the same issue.
Yes,
Sorry.
Is there any evidence that the sand-producing algae are more resilient than the corals?
So that the what?
Is there any evidence that the sand-producing algae that grow on our reefs, that they're more resilient than the reefs themselves, or?
Oh yes, they will live to higher temperatures. These you see them in seagrass beds. They're quite abundant here.
Right.
They're quite abundant here. In Jamaica, we've lost them because they've been overgrown by weeds that are fleshy weeds that don't produce sand. They've killed off the good algae, and we only have the bad algae. Okay, but here you have lots of the good algae. You have the bad algae in places here wherever the nutrients go into the water, as Billy points out. I mean, luckily you don't have nearly as much nutrients going to the water as most places I go, so those areas of damage are relatively limited here, and you want to keep it that way, you know.
In Key West, they've spent $67 million.
Yes.
Between 2017 and 2022.